for joining us at our Professional Growth Series webinar that we have with Aaron and Laura from DeVry University. We're so excited to have them again. We had them a couple weeks back and had a super great webinar with them as well. Today we'll be talking about conflict transformation. And yeah, thank you guys for being here. Just a couple of quick reminders for everybody joining in. We'll go ahead and be doing a post-event email, and that'll have the presentation. We'll also have the recording of the webinar as well as the contact info for Aaron and Laura so that you guys can get connected with them. If you have any questions or just want follow-up conversations, they'll be available for that. Something exciting for today's webinar is that every person that's attending, we're going to go ahead and do a raffle for a Diamondbacks game ticket. So we'll go ahead and announce the winners of that after the webinar, after we do some Q&A, but we just wanted to give you that heads up that we'll be putting your names in the raffle. The other thing is that, yeah, we will be recording this, but please feel free to use the chat and, round up your questions, and we just want as much engagement as possible. So yeah, don't hesitate to ask to unmute or anything like that. We will hold for Q&A until after the presentation, but feel free to use the chat in the meantime. So I think that's it on my part. So Aaron and Laura, you guys can go ahead and take it over. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our workshop on conflict transformation. Laura and I are excited to be here with you again to share some insight on this interesting workplace dynamic. So yes or no, and you can feel free to put this in the chat. Who has ever been involved in a conflict or an argument? And this can be in your personal life or in your professional workspace. And while we're waiting on everybody to chime in there, yes. I'm sure we all have. I know I have. And now I want you to think about a conflict you might have had at work and the cause of that conflict. I know for me personally, I've run into conflicts with peers in the workplace because of a clash in personalities or communication styles. And does anybody have any personal experiences or any causes of conflict you might want to share in the chat? And while everybody is sharing that information, Laura, did you have any insight you'd like to share on this topic before we continue?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to weigh in really quickly. I think this is an interesting topic because most of us have experienced conflict directly, or we've seen it, right? We've seen it in the workplace, and we've seen how it can affect productivity, even if left unaddressed. I think conflict is natural. We're all human beings, right? We all have our different experiences, our different perspectives, our different communication styles. We're all different, so that can lead to conflict. It's when it goes unaddressed that it can fester and just become, it can sour relationships, which nobody wants that, right? We want to keep our relationships good and strong. You never know where we are in the future and, whose paths may cross, and we want to foster those relationships. So unaddressed conflict can sour those relationships. It can even, turn into sort of a toxic environment people talk about. And so we want to definitely give you some tools today to help address, those conflicts before they begin to fester and sour, things at the workplace. And actually, conflict and stress, colleague conflict is one of the leading causes of stress in the workplace. And maybe it's something that's not as talked about as like layoffs or the economy or, other stressors, overwork, working too many hours, but it is right up there in terms of, causing a lot of stress on people. So yeah, it's something we definitely want to address, and Aaron and I will provide some tools and some approaches for you today.
Yes, and we can't stress enough, we want you all to be as engaged as possible. And Saria makes a good point. Difference in opinions is one of the other conflicts or causes of conflict. But as we move forward with today's workshop on conflict transformation, it's important to note that conflict, as Laura said, is natural and inevitable. We as human beings are going to continue to, face these issues. But, our responsibility is to learn how to effectively manage through conflict. And so the goal of today's workshop is to help you learn how to better manage workplace conflict and transform them into create a more positive work environment for everyone. Today, we're going to discuss what conflict is and how different ways of resolving conflicts can affect the outcome. Then we'll explore some common causes of conflict. We'll also look at how workplace conflicts can have a positive resolution with benefits. And then we'll close out with the contact information for both me and Laura in the event that any of you are interested in learning more about the education opportunities through DeVry University. Later in the presentation, Laura will have a quick activity for you to tie in your thought process about conflict transformation. So it would be handy for you to have a piece of paper and something to write with nearby. When you leave here today, you'll have a greater understanding of the value of conflict and the steps you can take to transform conflict into a positive experience. I'd also, again, like to reinforce that this workshop is all about you and your personal experiences and insights, so your participation will help enhance everyone's experience today. So please feel free to use the chat as much as possible. Let's review this definition. And I want you to think about what conflict has meant to you and how it made you feel. We have conflict defined here as a fight, battle, or struggle, especially a prolonged struggle, strife, controversy, or quarrel, conflicts between parties, discord of action, feeling, or effect, antagonism or opposition, as of interest or principles, a conflict of ideas. But in the most simple terms possible, conflict is simply an extended struggle or battle, a clashing disagreement between ideas or interests. Just like Saria mentioned in the chat for causes of conflict. I am sure just thinking of that had you replaying some scenarios in your head that you've come across in your personal or professional experiences. That said, conflict is a part of doing business. There are many causes, but perceptions and interpretations can affect the outcome of a conflict. One thing is for sure, conflict can make us feel uncomfortable. Our goal today is to learn how to transform conflicts into a positive resolution, a win-win that makes you feel relieved and satisfied, calm, or even more confident in your roles. Let's keep going to see what we can do to make that happen. There is certainly no such thing as avoiding conflict. As human beings, we will face some form of conflict at some point professionally, just in the day-to-day of doing business. And when a conflict is resolved effectively, it could also lead to both personal and professional growth. I always reflect on my time in work in retail, and I tell groups all the time that some of my best lessons around conflict resolution came from that work experience. In customer service type roles, you face conflicts with customers, and trying to figure out how do you solve their concerns and keep them satisfied, but still want to make sure you're doing what's right for your organization. You can have various peers that you're working with that have different schedule needs. There can be conflicts with schedules and making sure that the work-life balance is fair for all employees, because people have different demands of them outside of the workplace. And possibly conflict with management styles, as you have management with different responsibilities and personalities and how they expect the work to be done. But there are some of the concerns, but these are some of the concerns you will see addressed with conflict as we move throughout this workshop. Since there is no avoiding conflict, what are some of the healthy resolutions of conflict? One can be accelerating change. I'm sure some of you can think of how a workplace conflict led to an internal change being implemented sooner rather than later. You can have a realignment of objectives. Think of how conflict you may have experienced resulted in reorganizing of the team's priorities. And then cultivating innovative new strategies for conducting business. Conflict can have a way of forcing people to communicate and interact with others to bring new ideas and initiatives to the forefront of business strategy planning sessions. In the chat, can anyone share an example of when a workplace conflict resulted in a better way of doing things in your job? We can review that as, yep. Good point, Laura. Changing teams and restructuring. Definitely. Good, very, very good point. But unfortunately, not all conflict is properly handled. The two most popular ways of dealing with conflict are running away or battling it out, and tend to not lead to the healthy resolutions we just reviewed. We all have a natural way to deal with work conflict, but what are some of yours? And as I continue, please feel free to put that in the chat. How many of you tend to argue your point and not give in? You know, those headstrong people. There's nothing wrong with being headstrong, but we just need to figure out how to effectively, you know, get our points across. How many of you actually just give in to avoid it altogether? You probably all realize that avoiding conflict does sound like the easier route, but ignoring or hoping conflict goes away on its own rarely works and doesn't happen. We can't wish away an issue. And since we can't wish away conflict, can you think of a better way to get a resolution? If we learn how to constructively deal with conflict, we may be able to transform a destructive situation into a more productive one that may even enhance job performance and result in better solutions. Can anyone provide examples of collaboration or compromise that resulted in a win-win? Again, me with my personal experiences. Personally, I've experienced conflict with a colleague about their communication style, as I mentioned earlier. And in addressing my concern head on with the individual, we were able to create a communication plan that helped streamline how they were sharing information and what exactly even needed to be shared. I'm sure we've all worked with someone that over communicates and causes anxiety for everyone because they want to give you all the information in that moment, even when it doesn't pertain to what's being worked on at that time. I personally don't need to know everything about everything right now. And addressing that conflict allows for a realignment in objectives and may help provide focus for your team. In the chat, see if they can compromise in my view. Andrea, good point. And Laura, we can't stress it again. The common theme throughout all of our workshops is on communication styles, effective communication, and active listening. But with that being said, let's continue to move forward and take it over, Laura.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erin. So I'll start by diving in. I'll take a few minutes just to look at some of the root causes of conflict. I think in our minds, we're already imagining or remembering situations that we've all been in, or hopefully not, but maybe we're currently in. And so what are those common causes? We'll go to the next slide. And sometimes it just boils down to differing perspectives, differing priorities and perspectives, depending on where you sit within the organization, right? Are you in sales? Are you in marketing? Are you in management? You're not managing a team. Are you the business owner, right? Or are you not? So when these different perspectives aren't clearly understood or clearly communicated, conflict can just naturally arise, right? We're sitting in different seats, okay, in the organization, and we don't have 100%, a view of what another person is doing or what their objectives and goals are, especially if there's not a good, healthy back and forth communication going on. So we're going to pause for a minute and do a short exercise that helps illustrate, hopefully, this point of differing perspectives. Okay. So I'll have you imagine that you are, for example, a copywriter. You work in the marketing team at a company, and you have a very tight deadline. You've been given a goal to write some copy for an upcoming email campaign that sales wants to get out there to help drive sales, right? The only thing is, sales wants this, they want their campaign. However, they haven't given you the material, the content that you need to write up that email or that series of emails. You literally do not have the words, you don't have the offering, you don't have the specifics. They haven't gotten it to you. Your editor is asking, where's this email? We have a deadline from sales and we got to turn it around because we have other deadlines. We have other projects on our plate as well. Can you get started on this and finish by the deadline? The thing is, you've emailed, you've done all that you can. You've emailed, you've phoned, you've IM'd, you've walked over to the sales department. You still don't have what you need to do your job. And, this happens all the time. This happens all the time, right? We're on a team, we're working on a project together, and there's just, for whatever reason, there's a delay on something that you need in order to get things done. And so you start to feel, maybe if you're this marketing person, this copywriter, a little bit frustrated, right? What are the natural feelings that come up, that bubble up? Frustration, maybe even getting a little bit angry, a little short-tempered. What happens next, right? How could this scenario, stressed, how could this play out? On the next slide, I have a couple of possible scenarios, and really the way it plays out is kind of up to you, and kind of your, how you see things and what your perspective is. So there are 4 possible scenarios that we have here. The first one is avoidance. Okay, it's flat out saying, look, boss, I have gone to sales. I have asked for this information. They have not gotten it to me. I've done all I can. Believe me, I'll show you the email trail. We met this day, that day, the other. You're producing all this evidence of what you've done, and I still don't have the information I need. So there's nothing I can do. My hands are tied. It is what it is. Nothing can be done. Okay. And so this is one approach. And you see it a lot in the workplace. Nothing can be done, but really this gets you nowhere, and you need to be aware of how this may or may not be interpreted, maybe by your boss or the people around you, right? When they see, kind of this lack of activity. It's not your fault, right? But people often don't care, whose fault is, or, where to place the blame. It's just the fact of the matter is we're missing this deadline. So that, it's one way to approach it. Another way to approach it would be maybe a compromise. And you could go to sales one more time and say, look, I have an extension, and you clear it with your boss and everything. Why don't we extend by a couple of days, and I'm going to just, really push them to get the copy by end of day. And so you go to sales and you say, look, you have until end of day today. As long as you can get it to me today, I will stay late. I will make sure to turn this around by the original deadline. We'll make it happen. Can you do that? And they say yes. What do you think about this approach? Any feedback on this approach? Pros and cons? Compromise, workplace is often about compromise. The thing is, if I were in this situation, I would, and maybe I'm a little bit paranoid, I would still worry. If I haven't gotten the copy by now, what is the guarantee that I'm going to have it by 5 o'clock today? Right? What is that guarantee? And am I just falling into, the same rut of not getting the information and further delays and making myself look bad, in the meantime? Well, I gave them another extension. They still didn't meet it. So that compromise may or may not work. If you are a very direct person, right, and you're kind of like battle it out, that's your style, maybe you're going to go to their boss, right? Maybe you're going to cause a scene. You're going to say, I'm going to show them this is not acceptable. They're really, causing this delay. It's on them. I am going directly to their boss and their boss's boss. And, maybe you do succeed in shaking enough people up that you get your copy on time. The only thing is this does create, it's almost like a battle. you have created a battle and maybe you win that battle, but now you might be in a very competitive situation where it's us versus them. Sales sees marketing as possibly an adversary or not somebody very, they're very keen to work with in the future. Trust could be eroded where they're saying, I don't know, that gal went to my boss's boss last time. I don't know, if we can trust her with anything. And how does that help you with future projects and collaborations and with your reputation? And I'm looking at the chat here. We have some good comments. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Andrea, I can tell you're a communicator. Andrea is a communicator. She's, going to that person one more time. She's talking with a project manager or whoever. We're just making sure, reiterating. Sometimes maybe people weren't clear. Maybe there was a lack of information shared or passed down. And you want to make sure that clear communication has been made, and maybe a couple of different times, repeated to different people. Communication and even repetition is very, very important. And yes, you do need to understand the other person's priorities. And that is the fourth scenario. The fourth scenario is called collaboration. And literally you could go to sales and say, and try to find out what is actually behind this delay. What is the challenge? Okay, ask them that, what have you been finding or not finding? Can you tell me, give me a little insight into what's happening, not happening? And then the important thing is to listen. You ask the question, and then you listen carefully. And if you know enough, and if you're skilled, you know enough about your organization, you may find something that you can help sales with. Maybe they just haven't had a chance to get together and come up with, what they want. So a lack of time, or maybe somebody's out on leave, a key person. Maybe you can help facilitate a meeting, and sit them down and say, look, let's take 15, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. I will facilitate this meeting, and I'm going to literally co-labor. I'm going to work on your team for a minute. I'm going to co-labor with you, collaborate with you, and help you in order to help me. And some people may say, well, that's enabling them. No, I would say it's jumping on their team, right? We want to get this deadline met, bottom line. So how can I collaborate with you to help me? And this really truly is the best course, probably the best course of action, because now you're seen as a problem solver. You're seen as somebody who can listen, somebody who is trustworthy, right? Somebody who's empathetic and who can help, solve problems and get to the bottom of things and make things happen, delivering value. Okay. So yes, we all want to do the right thing, but sometimes with challenges, like these where we're put in a tough spot, it's hard to know, but I think bottom line, what can we do to collaborate? Okay. Let's move on. Another big cause of conflict, aside from differing perspectives, right? Differing perspectives is bad communication. And I think this already came up, communication, bad communication, lack of communication, differing styles of communication. And this is according to the University of Oklahoma. Lack of communication really is at the top of the list in terms of, causes of conflict. The other thing is everybody has a different way of communicating, different styles, right? Those avoiders, I'm probably on that spectrum of, I just want everything to be calm and peaceful. And oh my gosh, if somebody has a very strong opinion about something, I might give in. And maybe that's not the best approach. Somebody may be more of a, battler, but you got to be careful there too, and diplomatic. And so everybody has a different way of communication. And sometimes that does lead to misunderstandings. It's like, I didn't intend, for that to happen, but there's a misunderstanding. So I want you to think about a conflict situation that you have recently personally experienced or seen it at the workplace. One in which communication just broke down. Was it a lack of communication? Did that lack of communication lead to prolonged conflict or a more difficult working relationship? Do you think if the situation had been addressed earlier, perhaps it would have helped? Would love to hear your opinions. Have you seen where communication, miscommunication, or lack of communication, would you blame one or the other? Or are they both kind of equal parts?
Or over communication and their message got lost in all of the mix of everything they've been saying?
We see that too. Sometimes, people say over communication is good. It still has to be succinct.
Yes.
Right? We still have to get our point across, not 100 points at once. We have to get the key points across. And so I would say if you're over communicating, make sure it's repetitive. Make sure it is the same thing and you're not changing direction. Yes. Right. Each and every time. Lack and miscommunication, it's the same. Okay, Andrea, our communications, person, lack of communication, miscommunication is the same. So I think we have to be cognizant of making sure the communication is there and making sure we're aware, right, of the styles of the people that we're communicating with, right? Absolutely. Moving right along. Erin?
Thanks, Laura. And I was talking about that communication issue earlier, but another cause of conflict is differing values. We have learned more in the last year than I would have ever imagined about diversity in the workplace. It's natural that people from different backgrounds, experiences, or departments see things differently. Saria mentioned it earlier, difference in opinions. Those are causes of conflict. You can lump in age, gender, educational background, economic reality, political leanings, religion, even approaches to parenting. But bottom line, conflicts can arise when you don't take the time to accept and understand the different perspectives of your coworkers. Another cause is differing interests. This type of conflict emerges when employees fight for their personal interests and ignore the organizational goals and what is best for the company. Organizations are tasked with looking out for their employees' well-being. So wouldn't it make sense for employees to return the same favor to the organization? I mentioned earlier about making sure that we keep our focus on the organizational goals. I saw this a lot at the beginning of the pandemic as we all transitioned to work remote from home. The organization allowed for flexibility with our schedules since many people had families and children they needed to accommodate for, but their lack of work ethic and poor performance was highlighted also during this time. This conflict tends to show up when poor performance is not addressed and can lead to resentment in and amongst the team. The next source of conflict is when there is competition for resources. Resources may include budget, visibility, or esteem. At one organization I worked for, one department had a much larger operating budget than another because of the business need they provided to the community. But the leadership of some of the smaller departments were always trying to argue their case when the data simply wasn't there to support their request. When one department sees another department's wins as a threat to their own existence, it can lead to a competition of resources. And now let's touch on a fifth source of conflict, personality clashes. I've been guilty of this, but this is probably the most frequent and can be the most challenging cause of conflict. And this type of conflict can get emotional because it's often ignited by perceptions about a person's motives and character. This can result in one person blaming another for reasons that may not be grounded in fact. How do you avoid this type of conflict? It's important to step back and be truly objective about the situation and approach it from a place of curiosity. Have you ever heard the saying, we judge others by their actions, but ourselves by our intentions? You don't honestly know what the other person's intentions are without asking. In these types of situations, it's important to pay careful attention to the story you have behind the conflict. We're going to have to work hard to sift objective reality from the stories we're potentially creating and sticking to on both sides. To illustrate what we mean by trying to be more objective when navigating personality clashes, let's look at two different situations and the reactions listed here on this slide. I'll give you all a chance to read over that. But to kind of go over it, in the first situation, you're blaming someone else. You're labeling him or her as the wrongdoer, which can bring on bad feelings from the other person. In the second situation, you're the one who has caused the conflict. You try to justify your behavior so that you appear to be more innocent or the injured party. The bottom line is that unless you know the whole situation, the whole story, you may be misjudging the players. Being objective in situations is more important for 3 reasons. 1, it prevents you from overreacting, which I've been guilty of. It allows you to, 2, it allows you to hold a healthy discussion rather than letting emotions dictate. And 3, it helps you separate fact from fiction. Now, Laura's going to take us through a quick activity.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Yes, I'd like everyone to think about, again, think about a conflict you may be having with somebody right now. And we are going to take sort of a psychology approach here in helping to diffuse and transform that conflict. And it really starts with us. It starts with the individual. You know, we always start with ourselves first. Okay, so on a piece of paper, hopefully you have something to write with. If you can draw a cross, right, a vertical and a horizontal line, that would be great. And on the upper left quadrant, in that quadrant, I'd like you to just jot down what the situation is. Okay, think again, something that you're going through right now, or maybe you have gone through in the past. I have an example that we can use. Okay, I know we're, you know, many of us are going back to a physical place, you know, to work. Maybe not, maybe we're still working from home. I think this is applicable either way. Let's say that we are, though, we're back at the office and there's a new seating arrangement, right? There's social distancing in place, and maybe we've done a few hires during COVID and we have a couple of new coworkers, who knows, and the seating arrangement is different. And again, maybe I'm that marketing person, I'm that copywriter, and I need loads and loads, hours of quiet time to do my work. And I find that I am seated near somebody, or at least within earshot of somebody who is incredibly chatty, somebody who's very talkative, somebody who loves to connect a lot, right? They just have sort of a different, maybe they have a different job role. Maybe it's those sales guys, maybe it's the receptionist. I don't know. It's somebody who has, you know, sort of a different way of, you know, different style and different needs than I do. Now I need, you know, that peace and quiet, right, to get my writing done. So I require that quiet space to concentrate. I don't know if anybody's gone through this or if this sounds familiar. Sometimes even work from home, right? All of a sudden we were working with, maybe our spouse was at home, maybe the kids were at home, and it's like, oh my gosh, you know, how do I maintain, right, the quiet that I need? And gosh, how do I keep up, you know, what I need to do, you know, potentially with more noise surrounding me. Okay, so in the upper right column, you know, in this scenario or your own scenario, hopefully you've picked something that's very relevant to you. I want you to write down, sometimes this happens, if you don't address a conflict straight away, we start to kind of explain it to ourselves using stories. These stories, you know, start to pop up in our minds on why this issue is happening, you know, what's going on, what's the root cause of it, you know, and maybe in this particular situation, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you know, HR really put together a poor, you know, plan. Why do they do this without consulting everyone, you know, or, oh my gosh, maybe this person is just unself-aware. Maybe I start thinking, oh my gosh, maybe this person is so young. He or she just doesn't know, you know, they don't know proper office etiquette. Maybe that's the problem. What other stories could there be? Maybe I'm, you know, kind of tough on myself. And I say, well, you know, it's my own fault, right? I haven't told this person, I haven't communicated to this person yet what my needs are and what my role is. But instead of doing that, I just keep thinking about it. I keep thinking about what they're doing, what I'm not doing, what HR has or hasn't done. And these stories are just developing in my head as I try to make sense of, a potential conflict situation. Okay. So these are the stories. And again, oftentimes we come up with stories when we don't address something right up front. Okay. This is where things start to fester because they're in our heads, and we start to have negative feelings, perhaps caused by our stories. We're starting to feel resentful, as I mentioned, to HR. My gosh, how come they didn't ask? Right? Maybe we're feeling resentful towards that person that we're now working with. Oh my gosh, maybe we're starting to feel angry, stressed out. Now we have to stay late, extra late when that person leaves, or we have to make sure that we're around when they go to lunch so that we can get our work done. Maybe I'm starting to feel, ineffective at work because, I can't find the words to really communicate exactly what I want to this person without, causing more strife. So anyway, how do I feel? Jot that down. How does the situation combined with your stories make you feel? Okay. And then what reactions are those feelings potentially causing? Okay. Do I find myself being, a bit of passive? I'm trying to get my point across, but I'm not direct enough. Maybe I'm finding myself, kind of taking a passive aggressive approach, trying to drop hints. Oh my gosh. And I'm realizing, well, that's not helping. Do I find myself complaining a lot behind that person's back? That's definitely not helping, right? So here we see our reactions that may be kind of coming out of our feelings, which are caused by the stories that we're coming up with in our head. And why? Just because we didn't address this early on. Day one, we could have said, hey, you know what? This is my role. Tell me more about your role, right? And then listen, step back and listen, but it's never too late. And that's the thing with conflict. That's the thing with conflict. We can always address it, anytime is a good time, as soon as possible, but really anytime is a good time. And breaking down the situation, though, starting with ourselves and understanding the stories, the feelings, and the reactions can help us get to that point, right? Because we're able to sift through what's really happening, what is fictional, what is, things that I'm kind of kind of seeing that may not be there objectively. By breaking it down and starting with ourselves, we can really decipher what our approach should be. And maybe it's a 5-minute conversation. Yes, it should have been done, weeks ago. But like I said, there's always time. And maybe we can just clarify our assumptions and talk with that person, see what their perspective is, what their objectives and goals are, and begin to focus on a solution. For maybe there's a quiet space I can go to when writing. I don't have to go to HR for a new floor plan. Maybe I can move, when I'm doing my quiet work. Maybe there's a way that I can time manage my day in a different way, right? Maybe I do need to spend more time connecting with this employee because they value that connection and that conversation and that relationship. And maybe they need sort of that, to validate themselves. Maybe that would help boost overall productivity, throughout the workplace. Can I let them know? Can I just be very clear? In the mornings, that's when I write. And that's why, I'm kind of quiet and my head is down and I'm not avoiding you. But I'm on deadlines and I need to get that done by certain, time of day, and maybe we ask them for solutions, right? So yes, it's definitely a process. Absolutely, for sure. I believe it does start with, that reflection, self-reflection, breaking it down, seeing where we are. Obviously, if we can nip things in the bud, even better. But if we haven't been able to, then let's break it down and see what our approach is. So on to the next slide. just to underline, I think identifying those stories, sifting fact from fiction is key to diffusing conflict. And we've been calling it transforming the conflict into something better, right? And not letting it fester and become sour, sour the workplace, or, even create sort of a toxic environment. So now I'm going to talk about 8 steps. This is published by North Carolina State University on how, kind of steps that we can take to transform, additional steps that we can take. And according to this research, what they say is the first step is really start with a positive, effective atmosphere. Whether that is maybe stepping out of the office, maybe you take somebody to lunch, or maybe it's just referring to your own attitude, right? Making sure that we are creating a positive, effective, pro-communication atmosphere. Okay, so we can begin that process of resolving conflict. Bottom line, we want to clarify, and we do that through communication. We want to clarify perceptions. Our behaviors are often based on how we see a situation, as just illustrated by our activity. And these perceptions or filters can often get in the way of finding the truth about a situation. So yes, we want to clarify our perceptions, and that's usually done through communication and active listening. We want to understand and separate our needs from our wants. Okay, and also consider, what are the other person's needs? Maybe that person needs to be boisterous because they're on the phone with clients, right? They need to exude that energy. Maybe they're greeting people in the front, maybe they are reception. Okay, and I may want to have a quiet place all day to work, 8 hours of quiet, peace and quiet, but really maybe I only need, what is my need? What are my deadlines, right? Can I time manage? So separate those needs from your wants and your preferences. Okay. And then understand, the people that you're in conflict with, what are their needs? What are their wants? Step 4 is key. Strive to stay positive. Always assume positive intent. Always assume positive intent, and always stay positive yourself. Okay, always stay positive. Don't fall into any negativity that may, there may be objective negativity around you. Don't fall into the trap of falling into that negativity. Okay, a lot will depend on your attitude, and a positive attitude no matter what, right? It may be tempting to, meet somebody at their level or what have you, but approach conflicts with curiosity, with understanding, with compassion, empathy, and with an attitude of wanting to resolve, any challenges or issues. Step 5, always be in learning mode, right? Try to learn from the situation. I think, Erin was referring to, working in retail, how much she learned, and I'm sure is applying, this very day. And I think we've all had those career jobs per se, where we've learned so much, so I would say we always want to be in that learning mode, right? Listen and learn. Okay. Let this experience help you to grow professionally. Okay. Collaborate, like we talked about before, by offering, assistance and being open to any options that, the people that we're working with may come up with. Be open to their options as well. Okay. Step 7, don't assume that you can move past the conflict. Sometimes the avoiders think maybe one conversation is going to get everything resolved in one day, and we're never going to have to address this conflict again. And usually that's not the case. Usually there are interim steps, or things that need to be put in place, or relationships that need to be rebuilt. So kind of in your mind, have stepping stones in place, right, that are going to help you achieve your shared goals. And the final step, instead of making demands that could potentially create a win-lose situation, definitely work together to create mutually beneficial agreements that meet each other's needs, right? So in summary, by emphasizing, I think it's effective communication, emotional awareness, starting with ourselves, interpersonal skills, and group processes, we can truly start to transform that conflict. Erin, back to you.
Thanks so much, Laura. But as we mentioned earlier, conflict can be positive. We've been saying remain positive throughout the entire process of figuring out how to work through conflict and get to that positive resolution. But let's look at how we can transform our workplace interactions and turn them into positive benefits. We can tackle and engage early. When you identify the issues that are causing a conflict in the workplace and address them early on, you may discover underlying issues that haven't been addressed, such as processes that could have used some improvement or maybe should have been replaced altogether. As we have been repeating throughout this presentation, it can lead to personal and professional growth, greater self-awareness, and a heightened EQ, which in and of itself can be powerful as you seek to achieve more in life and in your careers. Now, we've covered a lot of information today on conflict, and I hope that rather than trying to avoid, prevent, or wish away conflict, that you, your team, and your organization can learn to welcome it and address it and transform it into a positive experience. Conflict transformation skills can be learned, and if you haven't already done so, we encourage you to seek out additional development training to support your efforts. Let's turn conflict into a positive experience. And as we close, we want to thank all of you for attending this webinar this morning and sincerely hope that there have been some good takeaways that will help you in your personal and professional development. We mentioned earlier in the agenda review that our contact information will be listed for your reference, and encourage you to please reach out to us with any additional questions you think of later, or for those interested in learning more about the educational opportunities through a degree or certificate at DeVry University, we are here for you as well. We want to thank you all again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next workshop in July, where we start talking more about communication, which has been a recurring theme in our first two. But we want to make sure that we now open up the floor for any Q&A or any feedback you have for us.
Thank you so much, ladies. Again, super valuable information that keeps us, it's helpful for not just, virtual workplace, but in person too, and getting ready for that. So that's super helpful. I don't see any questions in the chat just yet. It looks like, there was a lot of positive feedback and, obviously really applicable information. We've all dealt with conflict to a degree in the workplace. So super helpful. Do you guys, while we wait for questions, do you guys happen to have any, last closing thoughts or just comments, anything like that regarding the presentation?
You ask for Erin and myself?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think conflict is it's one of those things. It happens, conflict happens, and there is so much positive that can come out of it, right? It's like that painful process to improve things at work, but not if it's left to fester, right? Not if personal conflict is left unaddressed. And like I said, it is one of the leading, causes of workplace stress, right? And so we do want to make sure that we're, just approaching everything very carefully. And people say communication, but I think understanding other people's styles of communication is very key, as well as that active listening. And yeah, what is the role of a manager in resolving conflicts with their employees? I think it starts with a ton of active listening, right? And there's a couple of approaches that a manager can take, and sometimes it feels like they're choosing one person over another, or they're validating one person over another. And that's tough too, right? If you say, well, they're right and you're wrong, that sometimes doesn't really resolve the conflict. It really is, I think, training. I think it boils down to additional training in self-awareness, right? And communication skills, basically those EQ skills that are so in need, and sought after in the workplace. Interpersonal skills, it can boil down to that training and helping people to be more self-aware. Sometimes people are negative in a situation, they remain negative to solve a situation. There's something deeper, You know, sometimes I've seen this, there's something deeper, you know, and it's not you or the situation, but there's something perhaps in their past. I don't know, you know, and I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but there's something that just keeps coming out due to unresolved tension or anger or stress or trauma. And that's tough. That's tough. And that's where you really want to back up and make sure that the training is in place, but also the focus on work processes. You know, what processes do we have established through HR that we want to adhere to? You don't want to get too outside of the rule book. What are the training resources that you have at your organization? What are the HR processes, right? Stick with those processes, okay, while definitely encouraging, you know, training in terms of communication and self-awareness and, you know, interpersonal skills.
But yeah, and I don't want to piggyback on your comments there, Laura, because Ivan has a very good question there, and I have actually I don't like to feel like I don't look like I've been around that long, but I have a lot of experience.
Don't date yourself. Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes, as Laura mentioned, a negative employee, usually there's something else going on that has nothing to do with what it is that you're addressing in that moment. And in those types of situations, Ivan, it may be necessary to bring HR in. I've had situations like that, and then once I brought HR in, they were able to get to the bottom of it because this person had some stuff going on in their personal life that had nothing to do with work, but for whatever reason, they felt easier. It was easier for them rather to just lash out at work.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a tough situation, and it's probably a lot of times that is what is behind, you know, interpersonal conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, absolutely. So it's tough, but again, I think we do start with ourselves still, you know, and make sure, are we listening clearly, right? Are we listening for content? Are we responding?
Open to
Yeah.
constructive
Are we open?
criticism?
Exactly.
Because sometimes ourselves, we can just be shut down from hearing what else someone has to say back to us. And we have to be open to receiving that feedback as well as delivering it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very heightened self-awareness. I think if we find ourselves in a situation like this, it's definitely a time to almost, you know, step back, listen intently. And the manager does have a role. The manager absolutely has a role. And I think the manager will be the type that, you know, sometimes the manager will want to either avoid conflict or battle it out. And again, two very ineffective approaches, somewhere in the middle, right? We need to address, but with very, you know, in a very neutral way and non-charged way. But we absolutely need to address the elephant in the room, right? Because this type of stress, you know, when left unaddressed, it can lead to increased absenteeism. Sometimes you'll lose somebody that's a very good performer, you know, because they feel like something's not being addressed that needs to be. So yeah, managers have to address it, but in a very, very cool, neutral way. And then yes, you know, if HR needs to be brought in, HR needs to be brought in according to your own processes and principles at work.
Totally. Such good stuff, ladies. Again, thank you so much. We did do that raffle for those 2 Diamondbacks tickets for our participants, and we just spun the wheel, put a bunch of different names in from our attendees, and we got Karina McNamee. I think that's how you pronounce your last name. So congratulations, you got the 2 Diamondbacks tickets. It's for this coming Monday. And it's against the Brewers. So we're going to go ahead and email you those tickets because they're digital anyway. And so be on the lookout for that. So thank you guys so much for participating. And again, you know, like I mentioned in the beginning, we're sending out that post-event email with the presentation and contact info for Laura and Aaron. So if you guys would like any follow-up conversations or questions, they'll be available for that. And we look forward to our next workshop in July. Thank you ladies so much again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.